But what if, as I'm just about to wander from my point if I don't return to it, what if it had been true? What if 100% of the Iraqi people had really wanted the continuation of the Saddam Hussein's rule? It would have made no difference to us, it seems to me. We would have had to say that's too bad. There are four conditions under which a government, a regime, can make itself outside the law, outside international law, and subject to forcible intervention and regime change. These four conditions have been agreed, I think, really now for quite some time. I'll restate them for your convenience quickly. On condition of the invasion or occupation of the territory of neighboring countries, a state is deemed to have sacrificed its sovereignty. On condition of the, well, it is. If you remain in occupation of another of a territory of another, you may subject yourself to punitive action from the international community. Shall I put it like that? Shall I put it like that? In the case of the Genocide Convention, to which our government and many others are signatory, the convention mandates international action.
But not loss of sovereignty.
Mandates international action. Well, I think you'll find the consequences of loss of sovereignty, Doctor, if you don't mind my saying so. You don't think that the presence of foreign troops on your soil or the establishment of no-fly zones over your territory or the imposition of international economic sanctions is an infringement of your sovereignty? I beg to differ. In the case, to continue, in the case of the Genocide Convention, those who sign it are obliged by their signature to act at once to either prevent or to punish a regime that engages in an attempt even to destroy a national minority in whole or in part. Those governments that harbor international terrorists and those governments that violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty may also be brought to account, shall we say. I won't insist here on the sovereignty point. These are the four conditions. Iraq was under the Saddam Hussein regime a serial violator of all those four. I'll just recap. Didn't just invade Kuwait, as is often wrongly described, annexed and absorbed the state of Kuwait, a full member state of the United Nations, full member state of the Arab League, of the Islamic Conference and of the non-aligned movement, into the territory of Iraq, made it the 19th province, attempted to do the same to the Khuzestan provinces of Iran. The loss in point of lives in the first case, the Iranian case, is reckoned to be ultimately perhaps that 1.5 million casualties on young men on both sides. Even gave a name to the campaign, the Anfal campaign, as it was called, to erase the population of northern Iraq, the Kurdish population, to our shame, with American weaponry, which had also been supplied to them for the war against Iran. Gave repeated encouragement, help, solace, and hospitality to a very large number of international wanted terrorist groups, from Abu Nidal, used to be the most wanted man in the world, to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a very important lieutenant of Osama bin Laden's, who moved directly from Afghanistan to Iraq at a time when countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan were expelling such people from their soil. Iraq was inviting them into the country. I don't need to recall to you that Iraq is under Saddam Hussein, is the only country to not just secretly developed and tried to extend its development of chemical and biological weapons, but to have used them on Iranians and on Kurds, in other words, within its own borders as well as outside. In other words, if we come to the question of legitimacy, it seems to me that the repeated flouting by the Iraqi regime of every single international instrument and resolution ever passed or adopted, or principle enshrined by the United Nations, is a far greater defiance of international law and of the UN in theory and in practice than any attempt made by either the British or American governments to remove the regime. And it's of interest, in fact, to find that in the halls of the United Nations today, nothing really is talked about that doesn't come under the heading of reform. It seems to have been finally understood, and I hope it's clearly understood in this hall, that the record of the United Nations on Rwanda, where action was positively prevented from being taken to forestall the genocide, to Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo, where another ethnocide was in process and had to be stopped by NATO because of the permanent presence of the veto of powers like Russia, China, and France, some of them also repeating this process in the case of Iraq, a regime with which they had very intimate military and economic relations, and we know that several important French and Russian politicians were bought during the course of the Oil for Food program, in which the UN program designed for the alleviation of the suffering of the Iraqi people was turned into something between a bordello and a bourse. And 18 palaces were built, one in every province of Iraq, on the proceeds. The Oil for Palaces program was, as we know it well, the people were made to eat garbage and drink ditchwater. This is what came of the reliance upon the authority of the United Nations. It seems to me to act in the spirit and the letter of that organization is to say, no, it is enough. We must move Iraq into the post-Saddam era. Now, I converge my two hemispheres, if you like, for their sake and for ours. We have the right to call for an end to a regime of invasion, of genocide, of the sponsorship of terror, and of the flouting of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We have the right to say that regime is a danger to ourselves, and we have a duty to the people of Iraq. As it happens, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes, I won't hear anyone tell me it did not occur. The invading forces were greeted all the length and breadth of the country for days on end with demonstrations of unfakeable joy. I'll never forget seeing it. I will never let anyone tell me I didn't see it either. But that's, if you like, only an extra. They could all have stayed home and just said, well, we'll await developments. Legally and morally, it comes to the same thing. Legally and morally, I don't think it does come to the same thing, that 3 years ago, Saddam Hussein, a leading member of the Fascist International, a man whose party ideology was based in part on National Socialism and in part on emulation of Stalinism, who had concentrated the entire resources of the country into his own hands and those of his family. Everything in the country, including its people, was privately held by him. That this man is gone and in jail where he deserves to be, and on trial where he should have been a long time ago. And instead we have elected, as the president of Iraq, General Talabani, whose people 10 years ago were being subject to genocide, and whose party, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, is the corresponding party in Iraq of the Socialist International. In other words, of the International of Parties of Social Democracy, from the British Labour Party, the French Socialist Party. I don't think that that's too bad, frankly. There's nothing, people keep looking at me, sometimes asking me questions as if I owe them an explanation for why Iraqis have elected President Talabani instead of being forced to sign in their own blood a confirmation of a psychopathic dictator. Right? It doesn't seem to me I'm the one who owes the explanation here. Now, I don't know how far I've trespassed on my time, but am I getting close?
You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, well, that's great. I shan't need all 5. I had thought of calling my talk in a sort of neo-Hegelian way, The Cunning of History, Maureen Dowd, and the Pottery Barn.